All right, welcome to our next organizer hangout. This one we're focusing on how to incorporate business concepts into your IDDS curriculum. Most of you guys know me, I'm Cher, for those of you who are watching later, which is most of you. And on the line, I have three special guests. But before I introduce them, I just kind of want to give a framework of where we're at right now and what we're doing. So we're in the middle of our Organizer Hangout series. And right now we're looking at how we can incorporate the concepts into the curriculum. So for those of you who haven't yet, the assumption for this session is that you have watched all the Google Hangouts from last year in terms of what is our design cycle, what is our design framework, how we work through that. If you haven't, I would say press pause, watch those videos, understand it, and then come to this. So everything that we'll talk to you about from here is kind of building off of that design framework and the design cycle. And we want to look at how can we incorporate and what should we be incorporating within that design cycle when it comes to business. For most of you, you've been to summits where we haven't really done this very much or well necessarily. We've had one summit where it was very much all focused on business at CSU in 2010. We've also had examples where we've had a few business sessions at summits. And then we've also had examples where we try to tack on a business section at the end of a summit. And I would say all of them were okay in ways towards our goal, but not necessarily yet arriving to the best option. And so what we really want to start doing at this point is we want to see how can we be folding in business concepts from the beginning. And also understanding that we are volunteer organizers, most people have a design background. What are kind of some of the most essential steps to be integrating and thinking about, especially now a few months out from your summit? What are some essential concepts to be thinking about and how to fold that in? Some of you are doing things that are already similar, and so how that can pair with it. So I kind of just want to like why this is so necessary, and maybe I'll just have each. I'd love to. Yeah, we have. Welcome, Miguel. We're glad to.
Oh, hi. Sorry for today.
Yeah, tudo bem.
Tudo bem? Como é que tá, pessoal?
God, so good to see you.
So we have three panelists that I've invited. We'll run this kind of like a talk show. I'll ask them the first question, kind of introduce themselves, ask the second question about where in the design cycle to integrate some business concepts, third question on kind of what are some simple activities that they might recommend, and then we'll open it up to any other questions that you guys have. So our three special guests here on the line are Ben Linder from Olin College of Engineering, and Eric Reynolds from here at D-Lab, and Molly, who's kind of a hybrid representation from both Olin and D-Lab. She's our IDIN Innovation Center Coordinator. So can each of you introduce yourself, kind of what you do, and why is it so important that we think about business concepts at this stage or even at all in the design curriculum, especially since most of these are 2-week summits focusing on design?
Start?
Yeah, Ben, you want to go first?
So I'm Benjamin Linder. Formerly, I'm a professor in design at Olin College of Engineering, Massachusetts in the United States. I have been involved with all things IDDS and IDIN and innovation centers and network and so on from the beginning. So a lot of history of all the things we've tried and experiments we've run and explored. And I want to say that we are, I'm proud that we're a prototyping group. We like to prototype in creating curricula, and we've done a lot of that, including in the area of business. In terms of, this is to say, I run a substantial size program at Olin called Affordable Design and Entrepreneurship, or just their kind of social venture project. In terms of your question about why it's important to talk about business, I think my comments broad because I know other people here have more specific comments that directly answer this. I don't want to share the space. So I'll just say that broadly, it's really important that the summit and the curriculum matches your goals. And frequently teams have goals that actually relate to business outcomes, relate to things like project continuity, like sustainability of projects, team follow-on, and so on, that really are more business questions than they are design or business design questions than they are product design questions. And we've seen a lot of cases that a summit can be very much focused on design and then realize essentially too late that they needed actually a lot more business components and elements to meet their goals. Entrepreneurship, depending on how you want to frame that. So I think it's really important to be successful to understand the curriculum delivering and how it realizes the goals you have.
Awesome. So how it realizes our goals. Yeah, and I think Ben, I'm looking forward to a lot of Ben's comments as well, just because he has been doing this a while, not just with IDDS, but through his program. So he does, for those of you beyond this session who have questions of practical ways to be incorporating it, Ben is a wonderful resource, who is available at our very fingertips. Eric, you want to go ahead and introduce yourself? Tell us why is this so important to be thinking about at this point?
Sure, thanks, Cher. So I know if you can't hear me, please let me know. I know there's microphone stuff with Zoom sometimes, and with my voice. So I'm Eric Reynolds. I work at MIT D-Lab, and I've been there since 2010. For my first 2 years, I worked closely with Amy and Ben, and did a lot of the work that Cher does now. But we had a much different situation back then, I think. I first came to IDDS in 2009 as a participant in Ghana, and then I went to a lot of the summits and worked with a lot of you all that are on the call. So for the past couple of years, I've been working very much with Saida in our Scale-Ups program, very focused on how to get more products to market. So that's part of where my perspective is these days. And I would say that this is important. I agree with Ben. It depends on your goals. And if part of your goal is to get a physical thing, a prototype or product, like what we typically do with IDDS, to people at some number of people, and your level of scale can vary. But I would say you might imagine entrepreneurship or just getting products to people as a process, and in that process you might start, say, in the middle of a crater, and you have to climb out of that crater, and the direction you choose to go in matters, because some directions, once you get out of the crater, there's actually more mountains before you actually get to your target group of people, or success, or whatever that is to you. Whereas if you choose other directions, when you get out of the crater, it might be a valley, or it might be an easier path. And so to me, integrating business concepts into IDDS curriculum really means understanding what direction to go as early as possible so that your road is smoother later.
To kind of level out those mountains. The mountains aren't quite as high.
Well, not even that, just to choose to avoid the mountains. Yeah. If you can.
If you can. Cool. Thanks, Eric. Molly, can you introduce yourself? Why business? Why now?
Absolutely. I just joined the IDIN IDDS world back in June. Ben and I actually met working when he was a board member at the Artisans Asylum, which was a makerspace innovation center, small business incubator that I helped to grow, Greater Boston area. And so I joined the team this year, excited to bring some of the things I learned from both kind of running my own venture and also helping a lot of small scale artisans and engineers and manufacturers start their own ventures, to bring some of that experience to the innovators in general in the network, and also specifically the innovation centers that IDIN works with to try and create a bit of an envelope and support structure for all of those innovators in the places where those centers are available. As far as the importance of this theme in a summit, I agree with everything that Ben and Eric have said so far. And the only thing I'll add is there's a component also of the innovator themselves simply wanting to have the flexibility to keep innovating. So in addition to the goals around the item or the product or the solution that the innovator comes up with, some of these innovators, through your summit, they will have the opportunity to discover something that might be very compelling to them. This process of designing, coming up with products, solving problems. And it can be quite disappointing for them to realize later that they then don't have the tools to make that into a sustainable business for themselves. So it's another component of how it can be important to kind of set the stage, tell the story, make it clear to the people who might be engaging with some of these processes more or less for the first time and might find them very compelling, that there is this other component that's going to be really critical in making this activity sustainable for them, in addition to succeeding in getting that product to people, or in fact solving problems for a lot of people in their communities.
That's great. Yeah, and I think something that we all had mentioned kind of before, and some of you on the line kind of already know this, we've had basic discussions. I think we're all in agreement and kind of a value of IDDS is sustainability, and looking at more so how can we tangibly be improving the lives of people living in poverty, and what better way than if they could actually have an income generating activity that comes out of this. Now we know that's a far-fetched idea, that it might not happen, and that's okay, but if we can do our best to kind of prepare you to begin thinking about some of the basic concepts, even just what is a customer, what is the market like, and begin considering that as we're framing these problems, especially since these are only 2-week summits. If we can begin considering, you know, what are potential customers out there, what's the potential market like, we're already a step ahead of ourselves, so that we're not just designing cool stuff that someone might like, but we're actually designing something that people might pay for, that might become a business. It's okay if it doesn't, but how cool would it be if we could actually begin preparing it? So we know it's a lot, but now what I want to transition into is I want to remind us of our design cycle real quick. So let me see, I'm going to share my screen, and can you guys see a whiteboard? Yeah, okay. So I think we all remember this is my computer drawing skills, I apologize. Loosely, this is, you know, a piece of a design cycle. There are several out there. But basically, we remember kind of our 3 main parts when you think of framing the problem, and then we have creating a solution, and then we have developing a product. Now, at an IDDS, I think we all know, especially for the curriculums that I have seen so far, let's see if I can move these. Hold on just a second. So, you know, this is my rough drawing. But it gets you an idea, right, of how, you know, there's the iterative process, some information gathering happens while we're framing the problem, also while we're creating the solution and developing a product. I think all of us agree most of our basic design curriculum does focus on framing the problem and creating the solution, with a little bit on developing a product. And depending on where your summit's at, if you're a 2-week or 4-week, it'll be at different levels. You know, something we've learned is you want to tighten your framing for a 2-week summit if you want to actually produce something a little bit further down the pipeline. But what I'd like to open it up now is kind of asking our panelists to each of you, what are some of the most essential components Summit teams should be integrating at different stages of this design cycle? Obviously, there's a lot. I think we all know our friends at CSU. This is what they teach is business and entrepreneurship. They specialize in this, but we know that there are books and degrees. But what are just like a few basic concepts that we should be mindful of, kind of at each stage of this design process? And especially considering that they are 2-week summits. I'll let whoever wants to take that first.
Can I ask a maybe clarifying question?
Yeah.
So just in the, you've drawn a cycle, and that, so we frame the problem. That's usually the first couple days or week of a summit. We're finding a design challenge, and then there's idea generation and choosing an idea, and then there's prototyping an idea. So maybe that falls in with creating a solution, and you might test that idea with potential users or customers, and then iterate. I think, Ben, you guys have more of a cycle that moves horizontally. Yeah, right.
More like
yeah, right. And I appreciate that view, because as you go, you're retiring risks, technical risks and market-related risks, and maybe impact-related risks. And I think what you were saying share about the Colorado Summit, it was more advanced, so it's maybe later in the line of those loops, so further to the right. And I think in that summit, it was prototype to product, so that was designed for manufacturability, kind of late stage engineering, as well as project to venture, which was very much focused on entrepreneurship and actually developing the vehicle that got the product to people. So supply chains and incorporating an actual business and leadership of that business, the structure of the business, etc. And so to me, to try to start to answer your question, we can't do all that, or we've learned through trial and error that we can't fit all that into a summit. And we tried. And so I've come down on the side of, well, really, we should just have different summits to, have different goals, kind of like what Ben was saying. But the summits that are very focused on developing prototypes that are about design, product design. So just that kind of first loop. So framing the problem and developing a prototype and maybe testing. I think, from my view, we could do a better job in framing the problem around not just a real need, but a real market opportunity as well. And when we do that, I think the solutions that come out will just have a lot easier road ahead of them. And I've come to that conclusion through Zimba, the project I worked on a lot, through a number of others. And so to me, the kind of tools that would help, and I think they're actually part of the design notebook. I don't think we actually do them in summits. When we frame the problem, doing especially customer personas, so really understanding not just end users, but who the customers would be. And that means the person that buys the product. And sometimes there's different layers of customers, so a customer value chain. So you might have different customers who are important, and you'd have personas for all of them. And if you're not familiar with a persona, it includes kind of demographic information, but what's critical is it includes information about how they make purchasing decisions. And it gets at to whether people will pay and how much they would pay. We'll probably get into it, but those are things you can't just ask people directly. Or if you do, you probably won't get very reliable answers. So you have to ask things like, how much do you currently spend to address whatever the challenge is? So you have to get detailed in your questions, but or how do you budget for this currently, or how much would you pay to make this go away? Sometimes that involves doing experiments, but in the end, having clear customer personas, I think, will point us in the direction of much better design requirements at the start. And that would then lead us to solutions that don't have to climb over all these mountain passes all the time. Eventually, we'll find a downhill, and we can climb the wall and really gain market share in the end.
Ben, you look like you're ready to say something. We can't hear you, Ben, unfortunately.
I'm going to try to. How's that now?
It's still, you sound like a mouse.
Oh, actually, we can't hear them.
Yeah.
Do you want to just turn?
Okay, can you hear us now?
Yeah, that's better.
Okay, great. So, so what I was saying was that I have very similar views to Eric. So I'm just going to build on what he said, starting with a little bit about the point about CSU that was doing prototype to product and project to venture as two main themes over the summit in 4 weeks, by the way. That not only changed a lot of the curriculum that was at the summit, of course, it even changed who was admitted, right? We actually admitted founders, and then we admitted team members that we then joined with the founders to create very viable, growing venture concerns that we could investigate in depth through. So these things, as I was saying before, depending on your goals, it can really change what you deliver and how you structure a summit. Another way to think about summit curricula, I often like to think about it when working on it, especially early on, is that the summit is a window into a process of development, a design and entrepreneurship-oriented process of development, and it's not the whole process. And you have to decide, where is the window looking at the process? Is it near the front of the process or towards the end? So slide your window up and down. And how big is your window? How much of the process do you want to actually capture in the experience that you create for people? And naturally, the bigger you make the window, either the more intensely people work or the more weeks you have to have, you only do so much of a day. Right? And so one way to address that, as Eric mentioned, is to have design-oriented summits or entrepreneurship-oriented summits. Right? And it's worth recognizing that when we have a window into a process, that process really typically is concerned with feasibility, viability, and desirability simultaneously. So in a sense, you could be saying, not only do we have a narrow window into the process, we're only going to look at the top of the window at desirability. We're not going to look at the middle of the window like feasibility, or the bottom of the window viability, whether it's technically works, whether there are people that really desire it, and whether it's financially. So one has to decide where their window is into this. We did do a lot of work on IDDS Lahore that just finished in January, on dovetailing some of the principles in viability around things like customer discovery and customer personas particularly into the early stages of a design build-oriented summit. And we also then followed up later with value proposition work and then ultimately a little bit of business model work. And we found good synergies between things like problem framing and value proposition. And value proposition does a better job of bringing in the opportunity that Eric was mentioning. So it's more essentially about, is there an opportunity here? And build a technology that will do the work, but are there people who really want it compared to their other options? And does it provide enough value to actually make it possible to proceed, make it become a viable opportunity? So we found some good synergy between some of the design points along the way with some of the entrepreneurship points. And I think everyone should encourage to learn from Mustafa, Kendra, and the whole team or not.
So then can you clarify when you talk about value proposition, where you recommend that happening, especially like if it's a 2-week more design summit, where like would that be a part of framing the problem? Would that be creating solution? Could it be both?
Did it in the framing the problem space? Because that's also where stakeholder analysis typically is, and so which stakeholder. And so as we're deciding what do we think the problem is, we're also thinking who has the problem, who has the pain that we can address, or has the aspiration that we can amplify early on. So we focused it up early and merged stakeholder analysis, problem framing, and value proposition into a coherent sub-curriculum.
Ben, could I also follow up? How many days did you guys spend on interviewing potential customers and then turning that into value proposition statements?
Well, we did something else to help, because given if your window is not very large and you want to cover a bit more business and some entrepreneurial venture design as well as some product design, that gets tight pretty quickly. So one of the things we did is we actually preemptively engage stakeholders in communities and at organizations that provided some of the initial framing for the teams. So they essentially walked into more background information than is typically done at a longer summit. So if you have a 4-week summit, there's the number, you could have more room for teams to do the initial engagements. Given our 2-week window, we did some of the initial engagements and then could move more into that little bit deeper evaluation and exploration of the problem framing, the value proposition, the stakeholders, and so on. So they got introduced with some, essentially like an initial visit was done for them to sort of speed it up. They're like, we're going to accelerate the beginning for them because we don't have the window to have them do it.
Could you describe in a little more detail what exactly the teams were given, like what that prep was?
Well, to be fair, I think it was dynamic and fluid up until, weeks or days before the summit. And since I wasn't present, I can't be confident exactly what they were given. But the idea, the principle of it was that they were given more interview information, background information on stakeholders, and relationships were set up with people, and they were being expected to be visited by the time the teams went out. They weren't doing a cold search for, in this context around this problem, there's 20 stakeholders. It's going to take time to get to even half of them to figure out which ones I should focus on. We said, we're going to focus you on a subset of stakeholders in the space and accelerate you a little bit. Taking advantage of the fact that when you look at these cycles that Cher drew, it's actually less important where you start and more important that you get all the way around multiple times. So by accelerating the front a bit, they will come back around to the front, so to speak. They'll come back to that user engagement and challenge what they inherited and see if they agree, if their learning says they need to pivot, etc.
Okay. Thanks.
Cool. And you had, I want to make sure I kind of get some of these, and you had also mentioned going over like a lean business model.
Yeah.
Kind of from the beginning too, right?
That came later.
That came later.
That came after, that was more in the developer product space.
Okay.
But things like price and cost were up front to get a sense of, what could people pay for something and who would pay? And given that amount of revenue opportunity, so to speak, what kind of products does it enable? What kind of strategies does it enable? So being driven, as there's a term out there in the art for design for development work, which is called design from zero, right? Just start out with actually nothing and figure out what's the minimum viable product, the minimum features you need to address the need, and how cheaply can you do that? How does that cost relate to what people's willingness or ability to pay? So that's more of an early stage conversation. Eventually gets incorporated into the business model later.
Cool. Thanks, Ben. Molly, I'm going to turn it over to you. And then Miguel, if you wanted, we have Miguel on the line. He's not an official panelist, but surprised he is here. And I think he might also have some thoughts from some of the Innovation Center work he's done in IDDS. But Molly, do you want to weigh in on this as well?
Yeah, absolutely. Ben, can you turn off the outcoming?
Oh, I'm going to turn my audio.
Yeah. So I have less. Sorry, it's just echoing in here. I have less to contribute as far as like something that belongs in one of these spots, but more so something to keep in mind as you round each of those curves in that iterative framing, because you're going to be coming up with multiple versions of this thing, whatever it is, and learning new things about it with every version of it that you create. And I teach a class here at Olin that's a very basic level entrepreneurship introduction for first-year students, and we've realized that there's a part of the process of kind of the entrepreneurial approach to problem solving, which is really critical, which is about identifying the assumptions that you're making in whatever stage of the process you're in right now, in order to be able to effectively and with the least amount of effort test those assumptions by putting them in front of your potential users. And it can be actually quite difficult to take a step back from your own thinking to identify, oh, what's something that's inherently baked into my projected outcome of this product or this service that I don't actually know to be true. And being able to extract all of the different components of those things that you don't know to be true that will affect whether or not your product or solution will be successful. And that could be assumptions around the technology. It can be assumptions around the problem itself. It can be assumptions around the users and their ability or willingness to pay. But thinking about these minimum viable products, these kind of simplest versions or representations of the solution that you're proposing, what's the cheapest and most direct way? And when I say cheap, I mean both money and your time. The shortest path to being able to answer that question, confirm or deny that assumption. And that's something that is critical to keep doing at every stage of the evolution of the idea. And in the process, just going back to something that Eric said earlier, avoiding those soft yeses, answers that don't actually give you the information that you need. Like asking someone, oh, what would you pay for this? Or would you buy it at this price? Doesn't necessarily give you as accurate information as asking them to describe their current behavior, like how much do you currently spend on this problem? And so that's the nugget that I've actually found working with people who are interacting with these ideas for the first time from a design perspective. So a lot of the Olin students already have a bunch of experience with design and engineering. They're very comfortable with the technological problem solving side. But this idea of kind of forcing yourself to go in front of your potential customer and slay all of your assumptions, kind of put them to the test, is really critical.
Mm-hmm. That is very helpful. And I think we kind of review that too, right, in our Ask, Observe, Try. We talk about that there are things you could ask that might be a little bit different than what you observed. So it's good to think about that when we talk about even cost and what people would pay and what they'd be interested in. Miguel, did you want to add something while we're on it?
Yeah, I would love to add something. Thanks for the time for that. The thing that I want to add is about the process to get all this information. I know that's really important to get for example, the model, customer personas, visibility, desirability, viability, value proposition, pricing, cost. All these is really like variable. It's good to have an idea what you're going to do. But at the same level, what's really important is how you're going to get those information. For example, I can go and talk to people and say, hey, give me this information for me because I want, and you can do the model. But if you go and talk and create a deep connection, I don't feel that this information can be so important as the connection that you created there. So what I want to say to that, in the end of the summit, you can have the best business model. You can have the best way to your business or to your idea scale. But if you don't have a relationship as a first user with a first client that can put some energy in your thing, that's not gonna happen. Like for me in IDDS, it's more important you create someone that wants to give energy or money or investment in your project than the right business model in the very end. So at the same time in curriculum, it's really important to say how you get that information. For example, when you talk to people, even if a business, look to the eyes, show energy, create big smiles. If someone that you're talking is just say yes, no, yes or no, yes or no, what do? You will stop to talk? We fight then? I don't know. So like how you deal with that. One thing that I also like to bring, when you work with different cultures, when you say the word business, maybe it's not the right word to say. Even when you work, and specifically when you work in social, I know that's easy. You say your word business in US, but like for in Brazil, sometimes you're in a favela. Oh, you want to get money with this? So you say business every time. So customer segments, value proposition. So what's the right word to deal with people in the field? So maybe you don't say customer segment, but you can say, oh, I need someone to like this. So who is this? So you need to adapt the word for the specific, for the place where you're going to do. For example, in Brazil right now, we have permaculture, right? I don't know if the business word or the business word is the best word to do. Maybe we can say, hey, how we can make this village more sustainable to the future, where we can keep our culture. So how will you keep that for the future? You know, so this is one of the things that I like to bring, more like the systems. It's good to think about how the participants going to get the information for those systems.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's good, Miguel. I think just even focusing on the relationship, I think all of these are suggestions of things to be mindful of. These are certainly not things that every summit has to do all these things, and there's no way that they could and still be doing what they're doing. And we don't ever want any of this to suffer at the expense of the relationship with the community, who is, after all, the reason why we're doing this is because we want to be improving livelihoods. Their livelihoods particularly, but hopefully those at large. So I think it is valuable to consider that and consider keep some of these things mindful just in general in the system overall and the cycle overall. And I think there's a lot of depth we could go into on any one of these orange pieces. And I encourage that if anybody's watching this and they want more information, feel free to email any one of us, myself included. We can connect you with the right people and resources with how to do these things. We just don't have time to go over that during this call. This one's more of just a brief overview. But we're happy to help take you deeper. Something that I want to transition into now, looking that we have about 15 minutes left, is I want to become a lot more practical about this and say, okay, I'm an organizer. I'm watching this video. I have a 2-week summit and I have like 3.5 months. I'm doing this volunteer based. I have a full-time job, or I'm a full-time student, and I have X, Y, and Z already going on in my life. I'm bringing participants in. I'm also framing the problem. Like there's already a lot that they are preparing. So just kind of what are 2 to 3 very simple, very basic things that the organizing teams can fold into what they're already doing, to where they're mindful of the customer and the market as they're framing. A lot of them are at the place where they're selecting their projects right now and scoping those for the summit. What are 2 to 3 simple things that you guys would recommend that they do kind of in this pre-summit category, leading up to the summit, knowing that the design constraint is they have a few months volunteer time. Some people are there on the ground locally. Our Ugandan friends are there. Our Brazilian, we have some Brazilian friends close on the ground. Some aren't. Some are very far away. So just kind of any ideas you guys have or suggestions you can make.
And start. So thanks, Cher. I think that's a great question. And I appreciate what Miguel was saying about the importance of the relationships. So I guess in terms of specifics, I think Cher said something like, you don't have time to do all these things. I guess I want to contend that I think that you might be able to, and that they don't have to be daunting. So just take your normal design process, so your normal problem framing. We're talking with potential users. We already go out and we do interviews, come back and synthesize information. But I think what we're talking about is just doing that in a slightly different way. That's all. So asking questions in a slightly different way, maybe talking to some different people, and bringing out some information a little bit differently than we have in the past. And that will differently inform how we choose potential solutions. So I guess there's two places you can change our efforts, and one is where Cher's typing in the pre-summit activities. So like what Ben was talking about with the Pakistan summit, they did some stakeholder interviews beforehand. And I imagine they had an eye out for who potential customers were, what challenges they were facing, and what they currently pay to address those challenges. So that's great, and if that information can be gathered, so the beginnings of customer personas. So for example, just take notes of everyone you speak with, and just have those notes for each team. You know, just have and those can be the bases for customer personas for that team. And it's actually great if you're talking to many different kinds of people. I'll give one example just to try to make it a little more concrete. So there's this thresher product that DLab has supported for a while. It's a grain thresher, so for rice or maize. And it was part of a DLab class, and I think maybe that came from a summit a long time ago. But it's being commercialized in Tanzania right now through Elliot Avila and previously through Bernard, and had a whole chain of people who've worked on it. And in the early conception, in the early problem framing, so this is an example of how your problem framing can lead you in a particular direction. That problem framing was, how can we use human power to thresh maize, or to thresh certain grains more efficiently? So decrease the time of burden for people threshing their grain. Okay, that's going to lead to a particular solution, and you're going to spend a lot of time developing that solution. Whereas if you frame the problems kind of more broadly, something like, how do we, say, for example, help smallholder farmers increase their income by changing their processing process, changing their threshing process. That leads you to have possibility for much different solutions than just a human-powered grain thresher. And in the end, the customer, through much pivoting and iteration, it didn't end up being these smallholder farmers, where we'd been interviewing the end users, which are smallholder farmers. But really, it's these micro-entrepreneurs who are going to be doing the threshing, and that's how they can get just that's the way the value chain ends up working out for this particular example. And so the price point and the throughput for that thresher are very different for a micro entrepreneur than they are for a farmer. And so the design requirements are totally different. And so just if you know that customer in advance, if you can begin to understand who that customer ought to be, and what that value proposition is for them, and that includes something like it needs to thresh 50 kgs of grain every minute, and it has to cost below this much, then you develop a much different solution. And I think that's the kind of gentle nudge towards more viable products I think we could give just through a slightly different problem framing process.
That's good. And knowing that you can always reiterate off of that, maybe you find new information, the customer kind of changes, but having that kind of knowledge beforehand is helpful.
Right.
Cool. Molly, Ben, Miguel?
I can just jump in quickly. Two small things. I agree with Eric that a lot of the things we're talking about aren't additional content that would need to be added on to or expand the scope of what is already planned for these summits. So for example, we're talking about the kind of assumption sensitivity and assumption testing. It's really just a question of, as you're preparing for a community visit, when you're presenting, when you're doing the trying part of observe, ask, try, and planning your observing and your asking, identifying your assumptions be part of that preparation, and just framing it with that sensitivity to, what are the things that would have to be true in order for this to work? And is it possible that any of those are false? And how can you make sure that your representation that you're bringing to the community with you allows you to answer that question with them, and and the questions that you're prepared to ask. As far as things to do pre-summit, I'm just also thinking about this larger framing question of how do we make it kind of set expectations that this is an integral and critical part of this whole design experience. Even something as simple as finding and sending out stories and videos of people doing development work that highlight the successful business component, or even the unsuccessful business component, perhaps even more so. Something that isn't kind of a magic wand, and ta-da, it worked and they found a market, but something which actually delves into a little bit of the business story about successful development through product development and entrepreneurship, can start to change the story that participants are crafting in their brains about what this experience is supposed to be and supposed to give them well in advance.
That's great.
Just to try to clarify, I think some of what Molly and I are saying could happen pre-summit, and some of it could happen during the summit. In either way, you can shift it however you like.
Yeah. It's very similar to information gathering, right? It's kind of something that we're continually doing and adapting.
I'll jump in where Molly left off, actually. Yeah. And I'm hoping she'll come back to an innovation center point she and I talked about the other day if we have time. So some of the sort of concrete advice I was going to give is one is set yourself up for success. So if you're going to be doing a significant entrepreneurial / business component, all the things that were just said, you want to pre-signal to the applicants that that's what's happening, so that you have people who apply and prioritize that kind of experience with you. It's quite difficult when you get people who are like, I came to build, I don't know what this entrepreneurial business stuff is, but it's not what I wanted to do, right? So managing the expectations right away, right? So set yourself up for success. So similarly, some of the other comments were made, which is, the kind of groundwork and the kind of things that you can do beforehand to get the projects in a good place and identify key aspects. One of the things that was done in Lahore in January was to actually have a continuity partner with the idea that they might actually commit resources, either people or money, time, to those projects which were pre-identified, right? Which is, nobody does anything alone in the world. And so partners are vital to making anything happen. And if you have them, you're more likely to be successful. And similarly, we've seen curriculum teams want to do business or entrepreneurship types of steps, but don't have anybody on the curricular team that knows how to do that or feels confident up front of people leading or mentoring as a team in that regard. Just either find those people or don't cover that content, because you don't try to fake a thing that you're not good at. Just do what you do well, set yourself up for success, and do what you do well. So I think there's several concrete things that can be done related to that point. The other thing I would say that maybe dovetails to some other comments that were made is, and it just echoing a little bit what others said, is one can adopt different mindsets intentionally. So you can, at a moment, say, we're going to, at this moment, explicitly adopt an entrepreneurial mindset. Now we are going to shift to a human-centered design mindset. We are going to, as we go along, you can actually identify what those mindsets are that are at play and when we want people in different mindsets, prepare them for that. So as was mentioned about going out and interviewing and doing things like testing assumptions while you're there and you're already there, one can, in that kind of look, ask, try, why phase, can intentionally shift to an entrepreneurial mindset for a minute and then shift back. And that can be done along the way and help facilitate. Otherwise, people can get in trouble. They're confused about, am I developing a product? Am I doing hands-on design, or am I doing venture work? And it needs to be fairly clear, back to setting yourself up for success, how much of product design and how much under human-centered design and how much of entrepreneurship and venture design are you doing? And be clear about that, because very quickly you'll have participants that are just going, I don't know if I should commit to this and pour ahead to get it to technically work, or do I need to throw it all out and find something that's more viable? Like you'll get people that are at cross odds, and when that happens, they will shut down and you won't make forward progress. So you want to be fairly crystal clear about the process you're taking people through. And that gets back to whether you know how to do it and you have comfort with that on your team, because if you don't, it's probably going to come across to the participants, and their anxiety or uncertainty is going to go up.
That's great. Yeah, I love that you're driving home the...
I do want to speak just briefly to that point, because I think that's really important, what Ben said, which is that it's not actually in your interest to put a lot of emphasis on the business and entrepreneurial component if you can't follow through on it. But I think there is something there around acknowledging that that piece also exists and also is critical to certain kinds of success, depending, again, on, as we've talked about, what your goals are. And so making sure to kind of note and leave space for, this is where that business stuff that we're not dealing with is really critical to bring in, so that, again, you aren't creating an image of a world in which the design process gets you to a product that's in people's hands and being utilized to address a problem. Because I do think we've had that experience of, we have Summit graduates who get out of Summits, are excited about their idea and their innovation, and they work on the prototype and then come up with a version of it they really like, and then don't know what to do next and aren't really prepared for that moment. And you said there was something about innovation centers.
Yes, do you want me to mention?
Sure.
For that, Ben, before you start the summit, I would like just emphasize one thing that Molly just said. I think I like it. Do homework on software product development before. So I think three months before the summit, one good thing that the organizers could do is really let participants know about the project so they can. And if it's possible, which participant is going to work in each project. So if the participant knows which project they are going to work, you can research a lot about the project before, because from my experience, I know that every time and internet is a hard thing during the summit. So he already has your own library with articles, with URLs, with some raw material to make research on the field, because you already made before. You can go faster during the summit.
Yeah, and I think for some participants, it might be harder for them to access than others, but definitely the design facilitators having enough time to research those projects, go on things like Everpedia, Technology Exchange Labs, looking at what's kind of already out there, and it could also give you some good market. I'm sure there are tons of market research going on what products are selling for, who's buying them, type of thing. So if you do have that information, it's just another area that you could do more homework on, especially design facilitators, if they knew that beforehand. Okay, Miguel, did you have anything? We're coming close to our time. We're just about done. There are several typos on this whiteboard that I will be cleaning up before sending out, so my apologies. Any last words from people that they want to add to this? Yeah, Ben, go ahead.
I wanted to mention the conversation that Molly and I had leading up to this conversation. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. And that is, as we've been saying, what are your goals? And a good number of summits are often tied to innovation centers. That the part of the goal of a summit is to kickstart an innovation center or to reinfuse an innovation center with energy and enthusiasm, et cetera, and build the network in that area. And if your innovation center is the kind of place where you want to do some things that aren't just product design, if they aren't just the kind of physical invention and creativity, you will find once you get to the innovation center that people are really stalled on where to go forward. And you can find yourself with a lot of innovation center participants coming out of the summits who maybe do more invention, do more creation of technology, but lack the framing around it, Eric's metaphor, the crater. I always like to use something like a garden. Your product is some kind of food, but that garden is a vehicle by which that food's going to get to somebody. And if if that garden doesn't get water and sunlight, it doesn't matter how clever your vegetable is, it's going to wither and die. Mm-hmm. And having people show up inventing remarkable vegetables, but not being able to build a garden for those to grow in leaves you in a difficult spot. So we were just talking about there's a real coupling between the choices in a summit and for an innovation center when the two are actually have shared goals.
Maybe, sorry, Sharon, I know you're trying to wrap up. Maybe my crater could be combined with the garden, and that you're hoping to get out of the crater to find the fertile soil. And build the garden, like that's the goal, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and we have some good feedback coming. Thanks to whoever it was that said advice on stakeholder interviews, problem framing. That was you. Thanks, Eric. And +1, talking to humans.
That book, that's the book.
Oh, okay.
The book called, which has the unfortunate name, Talking to Humans. But it's a very good book. And it does describe a lot of what we're talking about today, I think.
Yeah, it was the same resource that I was going to recommend. So that's
great.
+1.
Cool.
Excellent. If anybody has any other resources, feel free to email them to me. I'll be sending out notes tonight to people probably later on this afternoon. Otherwise, if you guys have questions, we obviously have a wealth of resources of people in our network, and definitely there's tons of resources on the internet. We can help guide you through what's available, what are things that we've used in some of our classes, other IDDSs. I can't drive home enough the thought of we want to make sustainable change, and to do that, we really want everyone, if nothing else, to think about that there might be a customer out there, and to have that thought, that seed planted in this garden now, and to peek your head out of that crater, and to think about what will be there to support everything that we create after the summit. So whether that's an innovation center or some other mechanism of what's going to be there to support, to be thinking about that now. So this has been great. Thank you guys to all the panelists for joining. for taking time. Rainey and Miguel, thanks for joining, and Dana. And for those watching, thanks for making it through. I'll send out the notes and some of these resources. Next week, we're going to be talking about sponsorships and partnerships. And then the whole listing of all the other Hangouts are up online. So thank you guys for this great overview, and a great weekend to everyone.
Thanks, Sharon.
Thanks.
Thanks, Cher.
You guys.
Shares. Bye bye.
Have a good weekend.